Today, police confirmed tonight that the women worked as prostitutes.
I can say that all the victims are sex workers. We will investigate from all angles. Any possibilities we will cover.
Well, the deaths brings to 4 the number of women murdered in 3 days after 2 prostitutes were found dead in Tai Po and Yuen Long over the weekend. ATV's Anne Choi begins our coverage.
The discovery of yet another dead sex worker has sparked new fears about the safety of prostitutes in the community. The body was found at around 2 p.m. in a ransacked flat on Electric Road in North Point. The flat is in an area popular with lunchtime diners, and a large crowd gathered while police cordoned off the area to investigate. Just hours earlier, a third prostitute, a 35-year-old woman surnamed Jie, was discovered dead in her Tai Po flat. A friend of the woman alerted police when she lost contact with her at 12:45 a.m. Officers arrived at the scene on Quang Phuc Road only to find her dead on the floor outside her bedroom with no apparent injuries. Her flat had also been turned over and some of her belongings were missing. A post-mortem will be conducted later. Police made the grim discovery on the 4th floor of this Tai Po building this morning. Officers say there are striking similarities between the killings, leading them to believe a serial killer may be on the loose. But they're not ruling out other possibilities.
The common denominators include the type of premises, the nature of the premises, and the fact that the premises have been thoroughly searched, thoroughly ransacked, and stolen properties like valuables have been looted.
Already dealing with 2 other murders involving sex workers over the weekend, police say they will do whatever they can to solve the killings, which have sent shockwaves through the city. On Saturday night, a 30-year-old woman was found unconscious in her flat in Tai Po. She died the next day. Early on the same day, the body of a 35-year-old was found in a Yuen Long flat. The woman had apparently been strangled to death with a shower hose. Anne Choi, ATV News.
Well, sex workers have accused police of not placing enough importance on crimes against them, saying the recent murders weren't seriously investigated until more victims were found. But police insisted they took the cases seriously and had contacted concerned groups to stop more murders from happening. ATV's Arthur Kiola reports.
With fears growing after 4 sex workers were found murdered in the past 3 days, the main support group for them voiced its concern today. According to Zi Tang, at least 3 of the victims were among 1,800 women who advertised their services in local papers. The group criticized police today for not taking the first murder seriously, saying officers only really started to look into the matter after the 2nd and 3rd victims were found. But the group is now helping police with their investigations.
We actually have contacted the sex workers organizations and try to meet them to try to understand, get a better understanding of their arrangements with a view to working better together and to try to see what we can do to prevent these sort of cases.
Tang also stressed the force placed the utmost importance on the murders and said police would step up street patrols. Arthur Kiola, ATV News.
In other news, China's parliament, the National People's Congress, has elected President Hu Jintao's protege Li Keqiang as vice premier. This makes Hu's protege the most likely candidate to succeed Premier Wen Jiabao in 5 years' time.
It's long been an open secret that President Hu Jintao has set his sights on his protege Li Keqiang as the man to replace Premier Wen Jiabao when he leaves office in 2013. But now that Li has been formally appointed as vice premier, that has made the former Liaoning Province Party secretary much closer to achieving that goal. He was among 4 vice premiers approved by the nearly 3,000 delegates attending the annual National People's Congress session, which will wrap up tomorrow. The other 3 vice premiers included Beijing ex-mayor Wang Qishan, the former top party official for Guangdong Province Zhang Dejiang, and Hui Langyu, a member of China's mainly Muslim Hui minority.
A senior mainland official has denied troops used deadly force to crack down on protests in Tibet and dismissed foreign media reports of scores of dead and wounded. This comes as mainland authorities expelled over a dozen Hong Kong journalists from Tibet for what they say was illegal reporting there.
Workers swept the mounds of rubbish, glass and other debris off the streets of Lhasa as the deadline of midnight tonight for protesters to turn themselves in loomed large. Mainland authorities say the Tibetan city is slowly returning to normal after days of violent rioting destroyed scores of shops owned by Han Chinese migrants. At a Lhasa hospital, state media showed patients recovering from their injuries from the riots, many with burns, cuts and bruises. A heavy security presence still prevails, as over a dozen Hong Kong reporters were told to leave Tibet after being accused of illegal reporting, a move which was strongly criticized by the Hong Kong Journalists Association. Speaking in Beijing today, Tibet's Governor Changpa Punsok denied troops had used lethal force to quell the protests in Lhasa. He said 13 innocent civilians died in the riots, in contrast to Tibet's government in exile, which says at least 80 were killed, possibly more than that. Changpa said foreign media stories of a high death toll were completely untrue. His comments follow reports of protests in neighbouring provinces with large Tibetan communities. On the streets of Xiahe in Gansu province, evidence of violent protests was all around. Broken windows and streets littered with debris. Police presence was heavy and officers could be seen taking people away for questioning. It's not just Gansu which has had its share of troubles. Report from Aba Prefecture in Sichuan province said protests had flared up in 2 Tibetan schools, with hundreds of students facing off against police and troops. There are unconfirmed reports of a dozen casualties in Sichuan, mainly students and monks. Human rights groups say the unrest has put China in a bad light.
As the situation has deteriorated, and we're particularly concerned about an ongoing crackdown on domestic human rights activists, people being detained, people being put in prison.
Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd urged China to deal with the protesters calmly.
These most recent developments in Tibet are disturbing.
But the outrage over Beijing's crackdown continued around the world. Police in Nepal used bamboo batons to disperse about 100 protesters in Kathmandu today and arrested some of them.
Taiwan's presidential election frontrunner Ma Ying-jeou has promised to pursue talks with the mainland if he wins the top job, despite the ongoing unrest in Tibet. He brushed off concerns his stance could swing votes in favour of his rival, ruling Democratic Progressive Party candidate Frank Hsieh. Belinda Lloyd reports.
The Kuomintang's presidential contender Ma Ying-jeou has long advocated closer ties with the mainland, but even though the international community has criticized China for the way it's handled the unrest in Tibet, Ma brushed off concerns the violence could swing the vote against him in favor of his opponent, the ruling Democratic Progressive Party's Frank Hsieh.
And mainland China is a threat, but it's also an opportunity to Taiwan. What we should do as a pragmatic leader of Taiwan, we should maximize the opportunity and minimize the risk. That is why we propose that we should engage the mainland.
Hsieh believes closer ties will harm Taiwan and reminded his supporters that the island could end up like Tibet if it becomes too close to the mainland. Ma thinks Hsieh's analogy is unfair, but some analysts reckon Ma is treading on dangerous territory because his stance may persuade some voters to switch to his rival. Hsieh has focused his election campaign on stressing Taiwan's sovereignty, arguing that Ma's idea of a common market with China, styled after the European Union, would lead to an influx of Chinese labour at the island's expense.
A judge in England has awarded Heather Mills a total of $48.7 million in the financial settlement of her divorce from former Beatle Paul McCartney. McCartney married the former model and charity campaigner Mills in 2002, but they split 4 years later, blaming media intrusion into their private lives. Speaking outside the court, Mills criticised McCartney's lawyer, accusing her of handling the case badly. She said she was very pleased with the outcome. Well, local health officials met their mainland and Macau counterparts today to discuss the current flu season, which they say will last at least a few more weeks. Measures are being taken across the border to control an outbreak of the deadly H5N1 virus and prepare for the mainland's flu season, which hasn't peaked yet. Arthur Keeler reports.
With a recent string of flu